Okay.
Hello, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. Today, I've got with me Amy, and I are going to talk about how to build your change maker muscle, which I'm really interested to get into because I'm a big one about changing stuff. Amy, before we get into this, where can people find you?
People can find me at my email address, amy@amyradin.com. Certainly on LinkedIn, and you can also go to my website, which is amyradin.com.
So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is your book, which I've given a 5-star on Amazon because I wish I had this book. I said this just before we came out. I wish I had this book 10 years ago because I wanted to change things. And I work for a big organization, and you've worked for big organizations like Citibank, which couldn't have been, they're not, you didn't stand up and say, I want to do this and change. And they went, yeah, okay, let's do that. And this book actually takes you through the stages. It's a blueprint in terms of what you should do from a change perspective. So we're going to get into that. But let's talk about you, Amy, because we're here. So you ran digital transformation programs at Citibank. Mm-hmm. You were chief innovation officer. I mean, these are big jobs,
right?
So if there's any females watching, how do you're a great person there to say, I did these big jobs. Oh, great. Right. I'd love to aim for that. What is it that you would need to do to be, if I wanted to be chief innovation officer at Citibank, what do I need to do?
There's no clear roadmap, but I'll tell you a little bit about my story and how I landed there. I built my professional career as a marketer and actually doing direct marketing at American Express, which is a great company to build those skills, following getting my MBA. And what I saw around 1999, I started getting all these recruiter calls. It was the beginning of the first .com boom. And people were
look at that.
buying.
Look, Amy, look, what an inspiration. Look at that. Fantastic. You are an inspiration.
Thank you. My two daughters tell me that too. And sometimes I wonder, but thank you. I appreciate it. But anyway, I saw the connect.
But Amy, just sorry to butt in. If I said to the audience and said, I'm going to interview the chief innovation officer of Citibank, they would have thought he'll be white, he'll be male, he'll be middle class. Right. You'll probably it'll look like me, but they don't. It looks like you.
Yeah, that's true. I think Citi, at least in those days, was a culture of it was pretty diverse. A global company. I had terrific sponsorship from my CEO, but what I started to say was, I think what was important for me was I had the courage of my convictions and was always very focused on the customer and the market, which was something I learned back at Amex. And as the whole first .com wave started, I saw the connection between a background in direct marketing, which is all about using customer data and technology to create value. And I said, wow, this is really exciting. To take those skills and move them over to a digital job. And I was more comfortable doing that in the corporate world at that time than with startups. And so the opportunity presented itself at Citi, and I basically took those skills and moved them forward. So I think my success was a combination of a lot of factors, having that insight that I could repurpose my skills in direct marketing in a new direction, having the guts to do it, and being willing to take a risk on doing something very different, and then just seeing the potential of the internet, which back then was just beginning to show its commercial value, and being willing to dive into the pool. Then once I was in the role, when you're in a leadership position, it's all about the talent. And it becomes less about you and your ability to come into the office every day and say, I'm here to make my people successful. So I want to build the best team that I can and put them on the field. I want to set a vision so they understand where we're going, so sort of a North Star. And then I want to do everything possible to help them be successful in terms of resources, coaching, and removing obstacles, which, let's face it, when you're in a large, complex, and highly regulated organization, a lot of your role as the leader becomes finding a way to get things to happen. Because that was probably the genesis for my wanting to write a book, because the thing about change or innovation or transformation, call it whatever you want to call it, it's that when you come into an existing business that's been highly successful doing things a certain way, and then you want to change things, where a lot of people falter is they end up trying to do new things using the old methods and policies and processes and rules, and those don't work. So it was coming up with new ways to work, new ways to measure, ways to safely challenge and break the rules. Those are the things that have to happen in a large, complex organization for innovation to happen. And that became a lot of my role, great team, great capabilities, and finding ways to make things happen in that kind of organization where change was very difficult.
So you've worked on some big projects. So just reel off a couple of the big projects, transformation projects that you worked on.
Right. So a couple of the things that I worked on that is really exciting, and this was, again, I'm going to speak, although I've been probably doing change and transformation my whole career, I really think about my days at Citi as real high points. We were one of the first teams to introduce contactless payments technology into mass transit systems. And we did that in the New York City subway system, which you can imagine.
Because we talked about Oyster, didn't we, when we met before, about Oyster. For those that don't live in London, Oyster was the first time where you basically had a card and you tapped it on there and you paid for the stuff on it, rather than using it. We've now moved over to credit cards, but.
So we introduced the idea of tap and go into the New York City subway, and that was with a separate device. And that was, oh, by the way, before the days of the iPhone. So we actually created a separate sort of key fob that you could attach to your key ring. We introduced the notion of online collections of late payments through the internet. And for those of you, I'm sure nobody here has ever been in collections, but the traditional model for dealing with people who are late on their payments is to call on the phone. And back then, when we started to work on online collections, it was a massive challenge to the existing way of working. And there was a lot of pushback. It's now a standard globally in any consumer lending business is doing this. So we worked on some very big projects, and some of them wouldn't sound terribly sexy. But I think the other thing about what drove our success was always thinking not just about our vision for how we wanted to improve the customer experience, but how what we were doing actually related to the business model, how we were going to create, shareholder value, not just customer value. And so we focused very hard on what are the drivers of the business and how can we use new technology to create value for customers and for shareholders. And so some of the stuff wasn't very sexy, but very high impact. I mean, when you have a customer base of approaching 100 million and you get people to switch to electronic statements, that's a better experience, and the cost savings are massive. So innovation does not have to be sexy.
Yeah. You said to me in our prep call that transformation is not cool stuff; it's solving problems at scale.
Yeah, it's solving, and that's what I really, the way I think about innovation is it's, viable solutions to the real problems that real people have. That's the definition that I like and that the book is based on. And so viable, people want it. There's a large addressable market. You can reach these people. There's operationally, legally, regulatorily, technically, it's feasible. You can deliver it, and you can scale it. So there's a lot of dimensions to viability. Not just technically does it work, but can you actually deliver it at scale to a population that you can reach with a financial and operational model that works?
So in the beginning of your book, let me get this. Let me where are we here? You talk about, and you walk through the steps of seeking. So finding the thing that you want to change, seeding the idea, and then actually scaling the idea. So it's about getting the buy-in to the ideas and the changes. So shall we walk through that?
Sure. And I think I'll just say up front that it's funny when I was working with a designer to develop that visual, I said, well, the thing about this is that, we always think about process as linear, and the innovation process is not linear. It's sort of 3 steps forward, half a step backward. You may skip ahead. It's put against the lens of traditional processes. It's kind of messy. So I said, well, I need to, in 2 dimensions, on a piece of paper, show people that this is very dynamic and moving. So for example, the process seeking starts with discovery. How do you really understand and sense new opportunities? How do you get insight about what's going in the market? But the fact is, discovery doesn't just happen at the beginning. You've got to be, one of the things that drives innovation is a mindset of intellectual curiosity. So you're sort of always discovering. But the starting point to maybe create a prototype around something that you think has potential is, what's the insight that I have about the customer? And how do I translate that into something that I can show my colleagues and also get customers engaged in using? And that could be a wireframe. It could be initial prototypes or napkin sketches. They don't have to be anything terribly fancy, but really important to take that insight and translate it into the beginnings of a prototype that you can show other people.
Yes.
So that's a lot of what seeking is about, is kicking off. It's discovery to kick off that prototyping process.
So you've got discovery, you've got position with purpose, and anybody who's worked for a large organization will know, or even a medium-sized organization will know, how you talked to the different people. The way that you talk to a sales VP and talk to a chief financial officer will be very different, because both of them will have different, they're worrying about different things at night. If you go to the sales leader, they're going to want to make more sales. If you want to go to the CFO, they want to be financially prudent. So what can you produce for me at zero cost? So you have to position differently, don't you?
Yeah, and really important to, sometimes people, I've certainly been in organizations where there's a reticence to go to the people who you're afraid are going to say no. And my view is, bring them close to the table early on. So again, a lot of, a big failure point for innovations is people say, well, let me validate technically that the prototype works, and then I'll go worry about the financials. And I feel like, no, bring those people to the table early and really understand how the business makes money and how expenses are created, and start to help engage people in, okay, how do we make this work? Not why won't it work? So it's your role as the leader is to create that dialogue in a way that's much more solution oriented. One of the things I talk about early in the book in that first section is, tools from the field of improvisation. And, improvisational theater, if you've ever been to an improv performance, it's all about building on each other's ideas versus shutting down the ideas. And so if you pick up the book and read it, you can see how that readily applies to a business setting. The thing about purpose that I think is important, it's not just, if you can, organizations that have alignment from the top of the house on what I think of as North Star. What's our aspiration for what we want to stand for in the market, and what we want to stand for to our customers, and what kind of company we want to be? If you've got that North Star, it's much easier to align people internally around making decisions, because as you're sitting in the room having a disagreement about stuff, it's like, well, hang on there. Our North Star says this is our sense of purpose. This is where we're going. And by the way, what researchers are finding every place is that, the people who are becoming the mass consumers today from a demographic standpoint are strongly preferring to do businesses with companies that have a purpose.
Yeah.
So the purpose-led businesses, they're more focused on sustainability and on the broader set of stakeholder needs beyond the shareholder. So purpose is a big notion, and organizations that don't have a clearly defined purpose, I think, will struggle more with their innovation strategies.
Yeah. So you then move on to the seed process, which is prototype, create the business model, the green light moment, and the launch.
Yeah. So we already talked a little bit about prototyping, and certainly prototyping in a way that's highly collaborative, not just internally, but also involving users and customers, thinking not just about the product or service itself, but start to prototype, well, what's my go-to-market strategy going to be? Can I reach these customers? What am I going to need in terms of marketing resources to really prototype the entire experience, broaden the lens from just traditional prototyping, which tends to focus on, can I get the product to work? That'll take you right into thinking about, as I said, the business model. And the more you can anticipate up front, how is this actually going to operate? What's it really going to take? The easier it's going to be to sell in your concept internally and to arrive at and to establish early on, is it viable, and to start to anticipate, scale. And one of the interesting things for me has been, I came from companies that have massive customer franchises, right? So we were at scale. And since leaving the corporate world and working with startups, it's different when you've got, a couple of clients and all of a sudden you have to scale. And it's been eye-opening to me to understand how they do that. I think the startups that are more successful are thinking about that very early on. They don't just validate and then say, well, oh my God, what do I do now? I have to think about scaling. You may need different talent. The people who helped you conceptualize your idea and create a prototype may have very different skills and interests than the people who like to drive scale. If you're a B2B and you've involved your sales force early on, they're going to be much more supportive of thinking about how are you going to scale it. They may be helping you gather insights and think through, well, what's that sales process going to be? And what kind of people do I need to sell this? So this idea of collaboration throughout is really important, and it'll set you up to develop the basis for scale. Yeah, that green light moment is a big one. That's when when you're ready to say, okay, I'm ready to turn the
moment, Amy?
The green light moment, and it's one that I can think of a lot of personal examples. I still remember, again, thinking back to Citi, we worked very hard for a couple of years to think about how do we profitably and effectively book new accounts at scale through the internet, because at least in the U.S. market, direct mail was the traditional channel through which, for the last 20 or 30 years, credit card customers were acquired. And it was very complex. We had to rebuild all of our risk management models. We had to understand, the user experience. It was a big deal, and it literally took us a couple of years to get there. So I always, the title for that chapter came from the specific example of thinking of the day when our CFO ledgered over, a few tens of millions of dollars for us to scale our online acquisition program, because we had finally proved that it was viable. And this is a big deal because it's really the engine in a credit card business.
It's viable. Isn't that amazing?
It's viable, and people are ready. And if you're a startup company, the green light moment is the day within, you're reaching your A or B round, and investors are ready to put down serious money. So everything that you've done before is preparing you for that. And you also have to really start thinking about, what talent do I need, and how do I get from good enough to the sort of levels of quality that you need at scale. So if you're testing a new idea and customers know they're involved in a pilot, they'll be more forgiving of not being 100% up to their expectations of quality. Once you're out there at scale, you can't afford to not be running things differently. So you maybe moving to different infrastructure, partnering with outside vendors to help you, setting standards around the organization. It's a big pivot that you've got to anticipate and recognize.
I love the fact that you have this part in here about scale, because quite often people go for the green light moment and they go, it's all done. But
and they say, now what do I do?
Yeah, but as you say, that may be, what you've done is that you've basically done a prototype and you may have 5 or 10 people on it. Now you've got to have 200,000 or 2 million people on it. So as you say, the infrastructure that's required could be so much significantly bigger. And you may not have that. And partnering is something. So absolutely.
Yeah. And by the way, the expectations are going to change internally. Whether you're in a large organization or working with, you're being funded by VCs, the expectations and how your success is measured when you're just piloting and prototyping are very different than when you're ready to scale. You've got to hit real numbers. So your metrics are going to change as well.
So is there anything else that in terms of the process that of insight that you think that you should share with the audience?
I think you've got to keep in mind that it's not linear. And I think if you're leading an innovation effort in an established organization, really think hard about building those internal relationships to get buy-in and being willing to define new ways to work. That if you try to push your ideas through the existing sausage factory, it's going to be very, very difficult to be successful. So it's not just about the ideas, it's really about redefining how to execute the ideas. And then that you're never done. As I said, discovery is something that's always happening. It's not just the first step. Adapting and anticipating, which is where the book ends. You're never done, especially now. If there's one thing we've all seen in the last 18 months, I feel like the book, even though the first edition came out 2 years ago, it's even more relevant than ever, because I don't know anybody who isn't under intense pressure to accelerate digitization, to accelerate adapting to how people's needs have changed, to the intense pressure on sustainability. So the need to sharpen these skills and be even better at the kinds of things I talk about in the book is more important now than before the pandemic.
I agree. The pandemic's changed so many things. I was having a board meeting earlier today, and we've been talking for the last 2 years about how much the pendulum has swung one way. How much will it swing back the other way? And we were expecting by now loads of photos on LinkedIn going, "Hey, we're back in the office, isn't it great?" There's 1 or 2, but there's not hundreds.
When I hear "going back" as a phrase, I get very nervous, because I just don't think we're going back, and I'd much rather focus on just the immense. It's a scary time. Let's face it. I'd be a liar if I didn't say there aren't days when I don't have at least some anxiety. On the other hand, I look at the opportunities that have been created. How the willingness to innovate or to save our climate, the advances in healthcare, the growth in telemedicine and at-home care, and how that's making it easier for certain populations to get healthcare. In-home services. There are companies in the U.S. that are doing car repair in your driveway now, just as a small example. Delivery services. There's just every place you turn, people are demanding new ways. And then the innovation of the workplace. The innovation of, what has to happen for commercial real estate to be viable, and how's that going to work? That's just for people who have a mindset and an appetite and a desire to drive change. The opportunities have exploded. So it's a very exciting time to be a change maker.
It is. So I'm just going to put your book up again. So it's available on Amazon. If people want to get
and other e-commerce sites. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't want to just promote Amazon. You could get it at your favorite e-commerce site, but also Amazon.
Yeah. And I think it's a great book, and I certainly recommend. You know, if people want to change stuff and they don't know what to do, it's a great book for understanding that. So Amy, where can people find you? Remind people of your email address again.
So again, love to hear from people by email, amy@amyradin.com. Always love comments and feedback and outreach on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile is under my name, Amy Radin. You know, and just to build on your thought, or go to my website, amyradin.com, for more information, and you can sign up for a newsletter that I put out periodically. And you know, just to add to your comment, you know, when I wrote the book, I said to myself, you know, this work is really hard, and I feel like my teams took on the even harder stuff, and things haven't changed. People continue to face the same challenges, and I said, you know, I'd love to write down, share with other people who are trying to do this work, tips, advice, tools, framework, ideas. And I sort of envisioned, you know, my audience would have the book on their shelf and would pull it out and say, you know, well, what would Amy do about this? Or where can I find an idea? And that's why I called it a playbook. So it's always great to hear that people are benefiting from it. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from your audience.
Good. Thank you so much for today, Amy. I really appreciate coming on and sharing your inspiration as well as your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure to meet you, and I hope we get to meet in person someday.
Maybe one day.
Pond soon.
I'll come out to New York. I've got to come out to New York, New Jersey sometime. So anyway, they've just allowed the flights, haven't they, to start again? So maybe we can do that. And you, Alexandra Foster says she's definitely going to drop you a note. So
thank you. I look forward to that.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.